One.
Well, good evening, and thanks for those who are in attendance. Unfortunately, we do not have a quorum, so this will be an opportunity for presentations to the members that are here. It'll be recorded, and it'll be available for review by the other members, and if they have information to add, I'm sure they will forward it, and it'll get back to our developer. In the meantime, I think we should have Dr. Cimino introduce himself as our guest.
Hi, I'm Ernest Cimino. My wife and I have a business in Lower Makefield since 1989, actually, and we've taken possession of the property at 1666 Edgewood Road, which contains the old Presbyterian church and the manse house, and is immediately adjacent to the proposed development at 1674 Edgewood Road.
Thank you.
And as you know, this had gone in front of the Board of Supervisors as an informal presentation prior to the Board of Supervisors making their recommendation on how they would proceed at the Zoning Hearing Board. The Board of Supervisors voted to oppose the application for several reasons. During the application or during the presentation, the applicant did present some information, which I'll just share a few graphics of their project and a couple of the details of what they plan to do. If I just back up a little bit here. Here's a pictorial graphic of Edgewood Village from the March Associates report that was done in 2000. This is from a Carter Van Dyke Associates presentation that they had done back in 2006. And it shows the buildings that were in the village in the light pink. Potential proposed buildings in the future are shown in the orange color. And they had a vision at that time that Edgewood Village would be built out as sort of a combination commercial, residential, office type of village, sort of like a Main Street. I think they were looking for sort of a peddler's village type feel to the village. Part of that plan showed the properties at the point, which is at the intersection of Edgewood Road to the bottom of your screen and Yardley Langhorne Road, was sort of on a 45-degree angle from the screen. The existing house that's at the corner right near the stop sign that sort of blocks a little bit of the sight distance is building number 13. Building number 14 is the other house. The number 13, I think we commonly refer to as the Ishmael house. Number 14, we refer to commonly as the Quill house. Back when the nomination was made to place Edgewood Village on the historic registry, they had referred to them as the Doherty houses. Across the street.
Jim, could I interrupt for just a second, since we're in this location, to specify that number 15 is the chapel that was noted by Dr. Cimino, and number 16 is the manse.
Correct. And I was just getting to that. Number 11 is the Dogwood Skate Shop. You may have noticed the sign that's been hung out there right now. And number 15 and 16 are, as Mr. Hines had stated. So during that presentation of the report back in the year 2000, they had contemplated building several buildings in this area and some parking, sort of a shared parking arrangement between this property and the adjoining property where the chapel and the manse are, and building 3 new buildings that would be sort of an infill commercial mixed type thing. I know a lot of the village was contemplated to have some commercial on the ground floor and some residential or offices on the top floor. The plan that's been sent out there by Trello for this project that they presented to the Board of Supervisors has a little bit of a similar layout, 3 buildings, a little bit bigger than what had been shown on that 2000 rendering, and with the parking lot all on their property. Their plan currently is to renovate the house at the corner of the Ishmael house into 1 apartment unit and to renovate the Quill House into 2 apartment units. They would build 3 additional buildings. The 2 smaller ones would have 4 units each, upstairs and downstairs, sort of like a duplex look. And then the 3rd building would have 6 units in a similar arrangement. I believe they would have in this 23 on-site parking spaces, and they would take advantage of the ordinance allowance to have parking off-site within a certain distance. However, they need a variance from that. And the variances they need are for density. They're proposing 22.4 dwelling units per acre, where 12 units are otherwise required. That's partly because the village initially anticipated that there would be commercial downstairs, apartments upstairs. They're proposing all apartments, therefore they're double over what is required. They also request a relief to not install a sidewalk along Langhorne Yardley Road. Instead, just to have the sidewalk along Edgewood Road. They are missing a piece of sidewalk just to the right of their proposed driveway into their parking area. But that sidewalk would need to be extended down the road to Veterans Square to take advantage of that parking. They also requested that the new buildings be only 5 feet from the legal right-of-way of Langhorne Yardley Road, and then a 12-foot setback from the edge of sidewalks. And then they also requested not to put in front porches where the ordinance contemplates that 60% of the units would have front porches. Also, the largest of the new infill buildings is 163% larger than the average area of the existing historic structures on that lot. And the allowance is that it can't be greater than 10% larger than what's shown there existing. They also, off-site parking areas are required to be within 250 feet of the dwelling units. They are 280 feet away. And as I stated before, they also propose to have apartments on the bottom and the top where the ordinance requires that they have a mix of commercial and residential. And here's a graphic pictorial from a 2021 aerial showing the property, Edgewood Road on the bottom, Langhorne Yardley going up across the top, the Dogwood Skate Shop across the street, the Edgewood Chapel over to the right side of the screen, the manse where Dr. Semina's office is up in the upper right corner of the screen. And zooming out a little bit, you can see where the Veterans Square is and their parking area. They would need to improve those parking spaces to be suitable for that and install a sidewalk along Edgewood Road to get to their property. Across the street from here also is the Grange building. That is a historic office building. And off to the lower right, just off the screen, is the Woodside Presbyterian Church. And sort of up to the bottom of the screen would be where the Giant supermarket is. And the lower left-hand corner of the screen is where the De Lorenzo's and the orthodontist office has recently been constructed. So if
Jim, could you go back to the proposed layout, proposed site plan? Perfect. Yeah. Stephen, do you want me to give a summary now of what the board voted to do?
Please.
Or do you have any questions?
That's really the next step. Unless there's any questions. Luba, please feel free to speak up at any time.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so, and I'll give a little bit of intro to make sure we understand what's going on. So all of these variance requests that Jim just outlined were requests of the zoning hearing board. They came before us at the Board of Supervisors for a consideration as to how the township would like to participate or not with the zoning hearing board, or how the Board of Supervisors, I should say, would like to participate or not in front of the zoning hearing board. So our 3 options generally are for the Board of Supervisors to really just let the zoning hearing board really do nothing from a supervisor perspective, and let the zoning hearing board, consider it on their own and not provide really any input from the supervisor perspective. We do that a lot when it comes to, a couple percentage point increases in impervious surface. When someone may want to put in a pool or something, the zoning hearing board is very accustomed to addressing those issues. The next level, is how I'll refer to it, is voting to participate in the meeting. And what that is it's the Board of Supervisors sending the township solicitor to the meeting to actively ask questions and participate, so that they can bring back information to the Board of Supervisors to see if there's a continuance, or to see if there's an information there that would tell the Board of Supervisors, hey, maybe we don't like these variances, and maybe we want to actively oppose these variances, or we know it's of enough importance that we want to keep a closer eye on it than just letting the zoning hearing board do their own thing. That's the next level. And then the third level, which is the highest level, is variances come before the Board of Supervisors, and we actively oppose them because we just disagree. We disagree that the variances should be issued and that the project should go forward as proposed. In this case, we recognizing that one, this is a significant property in the township. Two, it's in the historic district, and three, this is quite the I'll say proposed development. We had a mix of we voted to at least participate in everything, and we voted to oppose three of the variances, actively oppose three of the variances. So the ones that we voted to oppose were I'll go in order here as I have them highlighted from our last meeting. We voted to oppose the allowing for a density of 22.4 dwelling units per gross acre where a maximum of 12 dwelling units per gross acre is otherwise permitted. We voted to oppose not requiring sidewalks along Langhorne Yardley Road, whereas normally they'd be required. And we voted to oppose the allowance of offsite parking to be 280 feet from the dwelling unit entrances, where typically 250 feet is required. The rest of them, the setbacks, the porches, the percent size, and the allowing apartments on the first floor, we voted to participate. Not because we think all those are a great idea. It's just we think the zoning hearing board could lead that discussion. Now, for those that we voted to oppose, couple primary reasons, right? When we look at the density variance, we voted to oppose that one because honestly, this to us looks like I'll use my same analogy there, Stephen. It looks like 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack. They're really trying to stuff a lot in this very small area, whereas and in doing so, it forces them to, bless you, it forces the developer to not be able to meet their parking requirements. They're not to the stage where they would look at their stormwater requirements and some other requirements, but there may be some issues there we don't know yet. And then it forces them to go off site to the Veterans Memorial, which we don't want them to do. That's much like the Garden of Reflection. Veterans Memorial, in our opinion, is not a place to put cars that are parking in that are parking a residential parking owned by someone else on public property. I'll use the word sacred place, the phrase sacred place. And then the other one, let's see, this is supposed to be a walkable, traditional, neighborhood development. So not providing sidewalks around the property when folks may want to cross the street to the skate shop, or have to get across the triangle here, or who knows what would go in the future at the other lot over there that may be subdivided and sold. We just think it's important to have sidewalks on Yardley Langhorne Road. And then I already mentioned the distance from the offsite parking, but it's primarily we just did not support using the Veterans Memorial for parking. So what we did ask is that the developer consider a continuance at the zoning hearing board so that both the historical commission met on Monday and then this board have an opportunity to review the plans and issue the board of supervisors and the zoning hearing board formal guidance from your perspective when you look at the development as a whole, in addition to its place within Edgewood Village. So generally, and we did have a few comments about, hey, if they got rid of one building or 1.5 buildings, that might bring them, for reference. I think if you got rid of 1.5 buildings, that would allow them to get all their parking on site. That would also somewhat reduce the overall on-site footprint, what might allow for some additional green space or stormwater management or slightly smaller, rearranging the parking a little bit, who knows, while still maintaining improving and maintaining the 2 existing buildings on site, which is obviously a big part of this. So we talked about that a little bit, but we're not necessarily in favor of not having porches and having larger buildings. It's just we're very interested in the fact that they are looking to finally improve these homes in the point. We're not trying to kill the project right away, but we want them to come to the table with a realistic plan that doesn't seek to take advantage of township property for their parking and overbuild the site. That's very important. So we still want to work with them, but we want to be very, very careful that the right type of project gets built here, so as not to have an impact on Dr. Semino and others nearby and just general residents trying to get around that area in the future. So, and also so we can maintain the historic designation of the district, make sure that's not impacted. So that's my summary. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I know, Stephen, you took part in that meeting. You called in, so I know you at least got to see some of it, but happy to answer anyone's questions.
Hearing none, let's move along. As long as that's up there, let me add a couple of things that I mentioned when I took the opportunity to address the Board of Supervisors. I made a point of the fact of not only the density, but also the scale. And it was at least discussed. I don't know if it's anything that could actually be addressed in terms of the site plan, but it's certainly one of the ones that we need to be concerned about in terms of the Architectural Review Board criterion. I did make a point that it is under the guidance of the design guidelines, and in the past, the HARB has gone along with recommendations for increased density if it was going to mean an increase in the historic fabric. And we can see right away along Yardley Langhorne Road that was necessary, but they had to be consistent with the structures. And I tried to limit my discussion to the actual architectural features that these buildings would have to deal with. So that was one of the things that I mentioned. I certainly talked a little bit about the history of the village itself and the fact that we are missing some other buildings, including 3 that or 2 that were taken down on the Flowers Field lot that still haven't been redeveloped or rebuilt. And lastly, I would say that there would I tried to leave it open so that we would address any issues with Mr. Troilo as he tried to look at different ways to approach this. And he did call me then, and I had about a 30-minute discussion with him about some of these. I reiterated the idea of the density being two, and this is kind of as a report to what I said so that it's on record. And you'll know where he's coming from if he mentions this. But I did talk about the density and the fact that this is well over what could be expected, and what certainly the HARB would discuss and most likely concur that, and in fact, our discussions of the previous meetings said exactly that the density was way too great. The sidewalks were an issue that we were supporting, and I mentioned the fact that I also mentioned in a note to Mr. Majewski that I think he distributed to members of the HARB about the need to maintain a certain rhythm and cadence to the space and the look of the houses by maintaining the requirement for porches. So the bottom line was that I mentioned this to him, was that the overlay that was approved by the supervisors and great effort went into it was that it was done to give some relief to developers in the expectation that they would utilize that to help improve it, not to go beyond it and say, well, that's not really enough to do what I wanted to do. So in dealing with that, I did make a couple of suggestions about the placement of the houses. I said that, and I think somebody else said this, that leaving two of the bigger units that have 4 dwellings in it and removing the other one and maybe turning the back end of that 3 unit or 3 house configuration so that it's parallel. There's a front wall, the short wall that's parallel to Edgewood Road might actually help the overall density of the situation. And then I was just a few minutes ago and I was thinking about this, and if they turned that driveway and parking so that it was perpendicular to Yardley Langhorne Road and put one of those units on the other side of the parking lot to fit it into the corner, even though it would be a tight fit for setbacks, it certainly would then have a sense of not crowding everything in a line that's only about 200 feet long and trying to come up against the houses that are there. I also suggested one other thing to Mr. Troilo, that one of the things we've done in the past is look at additions to existing houses to develop the structural integrity. So if the back of the Quill House, which is really the wood structure and the one that's into the let's say difficult in maintaining the structural integrity, this might be something that they can add a tuna unit in the back of that, up and down, and have 4 units there facing Edgewood Road rather than on the other side of that parking area, and make the parking area then more central, which helps in this distance to travel to the residences. I also said that in the past, we've looked at maintaining a facade and utilizing restructuring behind that facade to at least maintain the streetscape and the appearance from the right of way. So the front side of the Quill House then would have an addition in back of it that would help support it. And not really have to restructure it from the inside. In fact, the first floor, if there was a problem with maintaining the structural integrity, that could end up being on a slab at grade level. So it could actually be a commercial unit. So those are the remarks that I made, both to the Board of Supervisors and to Mr. Troilo. And I think that pretty well covers what my input was on the whole thing. So, Dr. Semino, you had some input as well, and then we can open it to further questions and discussions from the other members of HARB.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Hines. I went to the Historic Commission yesterday morning after reviewing the last 18 months of minutes that Mr. Majewski forwarded to me. And before I make my comments, I did have two variance questions that perhaps Mr. Kirk or Mr. Majewski can clarify further. And one was, this plan in the legend box shows that they're preserving 70% of woodland. But when you look at the before and after plan, it looks like there's 16 or 17 mature trees that disappear. So I wanted to know, is there a woodland maintenance requirement in the historic commercial zoning rules?
There are requirements for trees. One of the things is that a woodland is defined as in a couple of ways. One is if you have a quarter acre more of woods out there. I'm not sure if they meet that criteria or not. We'd have to look at it a little bit more closely. Or if it's a certain number of trees in a grove of trees would qualify. It looks like they're saying that it's probably not woodlands. Otherwise, they would have had to request that variance. I haven't looked at that closely enough to really determine whether or not they meet that criteria.
Okay.
Dr. Semino, if I could just add, the woodlands definition is not specific to the historic district. That's a standard definition throughout the whole township for any area in the township that might be potentially developed. So I think it's a quarter acre of trees that are 6-inch DBH or bigger, and then Jim, I think it's what, 10 trees at 10-inch DBH in a grove, something like that. But that's about the definition. I could be off on a little bit of that, but that's the standard definition throughout the township. If there's anything specific to trees and sizes and canopies in the historic district itself, I'm not aware of that. But I think that sounded more like your question than the woodlands definition. So I just wanted to see if there's a corollary to that, Jim, if there's specific tree issues in this zoning overlay.
And I'll have to look into that, but I believe that they have the requirement, just as other zones, that they're only allowed to disturb a certain amount of trees. And I believe it's 30% for this zoning district, but I will have to double check that.
Well, if that is the case, I just want to point out that my interpretation of their existing plan and their proposed plan shows the disappearance of 16 out of 17 existing trees, which is not maintaining 30%, the way I interpret it, but I leave that to the zoning officers to decide. The other concern I had from looking over the plans is I wasn't sure if a 5-foot setback on the rear property line with regard to paving, does that require a variance, or was that already within the historic commercial code?
That I'm pretty sure is within the historic code. And I haven't had a chance to look that up since we spoke yesterday, but I could look that up for you right now and let you know in a minute.
And while you're looking that up, I have to ask a question that was raised by the documents you provided me yesterday, where I was under the impression that within the historic commercial zone, every resident had to have a certain square footage of private yard. And I thought it was 10 by 10, 100 square feet. But in the documents you provided me, granted they're from 20 or 30 years ago, I don't know if they've been revised, but it says that every private residence in a shared structure with residential and commercial within the historic district must have 500 square feet of designated private yard. And I emailed that to you last night after I saw it, because in this 3/4 acre project, for every resident to have 500 square feet, we're talking that the proposed, 17 units would require, I've got the math, 8,500 square feet of yard. And the estimated 9 units, which is allowed by the 3/4 acre without a variance, would require 4,500 square feet of yard. But my question is, the way the ordinance is written, and I was only able to look at one page, is the yard requirement of 500 square feet per residence only in effect when the property is talking about a shared structure, residential with commercial? And in this particular latest plan, where Troilo wants to make it all residential, is there a yard requirement when they are not a shared building with commercial and residential?
And that is something I've not had a chance to look up yet.
So I'm concerned that there are variance issues that may not be part of this request for relief that also have to be addressed. Excuse me a second, my wife has just joined me. And Deborah Semino is with me, but not on camera.
Welcome.
Thanks
Dr.
for coming.
Dr. Semino, can I ask you another question?
Yes.
When we look at the site plan, right, they put their parking lot right up next to the property line, next to your property. Obviously, that looks to result in many of those trees being felled near your property. Has anyone from the developer side contacted you to discuss anything? Excuse me. Any of your opinions or takes on any of this, or any of your ideas, possibly sharing a parking lot, any of that stuff?
No, nothing's been discussed. And my name was brought up to him in the minutes from this spring of 2021 that it might be suggested that he approach us. But I just found out about this meeting from Mr. Majewski's office 2 weeks ago. And that was the first I heard of the last 18 months of discussions.
It's good to know. Thank you.
As I did point out to Dr. Semino, I did speak to CT Trillo, and they did say they were going to reach out to the Seminos to talk to them about what their concerns are, make sure that they maintain their property value and what is important to them as adjoining property owners.
Just a comment, Jim. I find that Dr. Semino's thoroughgoing approach to what's on the book now for ordinances and standards is quite amazing, and maybe we should get him as a volunteer on your staff to mark up
on
drawings.
Planning Commission.
We do have an opening.
My wife and I are very dedicated to the idea of the historic district and the neighborhood overlay. And when we took possession of our property in 2002, we realized it had these responsibilities and restrictions, which we agreed to and are willing to follow. We would hate to see this proposal of variances go through, which we feel would, undermine the entire.
Doctor, when you move to the left, your microphone on your instrument that's recording this is not picking up your voice.
Oh,
so we missed a little bit of that.
I'll just say that my wife and I are very dedicated to the idea of the historic district and the neighborhood overlay. And when we took possession of our property in 2002, we realized it had responsibilities and restrictions. And I would guess that Mr. Troilo, who is well experienced in development in Lower Makefield, also knew that when he first owned the property prior to 2010, and it went into bankruptcy. And then he was aware of it when he took possession of the property after he got it out of the sheriff's sale.
Yes, sir. I am sure that he was. And one of the comments that I've made off and on to the HARB is that anybody asking for variance from the zoning code is one who was aggrieved by the imposition of that code after they bought their property, and therefore they are really looking for relief from some kind of impact on them. And it really seems hard to justify a developer coming in who buys it knowing all of the restrictions and then says, well, you have to give me relief from these overbearing requirements. So I think it would have to come up with a very good plan that's beneficial to the entire village as well as themselves. And I think in dealing with that, by doing it correctly and doing it for the benefit of the village, they're also helping themselves, because they're going to make it a better place to have a business or residential units that they're going to continue to rent. So are there any other questions for Dr. Semino, maybe Luba or anybody?
No, I'm fine.
Just a comment.
Okay. Does anybody else have
Can
further
you
input?
hear me?
Stephen, Mrs. Semino is trying to speak. And
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Over the past 3 to 5 years, a lot of trees have been taken down on the property next to us. And we just shook our head and figured whatever they're doing, they know what they're doing, and it's okay. I don't think any of the trees were wider than 12 inches, but there were some nice trees that have been cleared. I want you to have that information. I also want to let you know that I was appalled when I heard that for this variance, oh, well, he'll get extra parking for Veterans Square and then walk across the chapel property, our property, where we're retiring, and go to his parking lot. So you might have covered that already, but I want to let you know that that's really ridiculous, and I'm very upset about that, among other things. Troilo, I know, is an LLC now, and I don't know how old he is or how well he is, but when you're an LLC, there is a chance for your business to go into bankruptcy, and then you're not responsible for anything there that's finished or not. And then someone like his son can come along and buy it for $100,000. You know, that's kind of questionable, but unfortunately, my brother is a lawyer, and he said there are lots of different reasons to have LLCs, but one of them is a very strong financial reason. Saying my piece so that everybody's thinking in the box and out of the box.
All right, Dan, I think that Mrs. Semino did not hear your information about what the supervisors were opposing. So maybe you want to.
I can do this. I can do the Reader's Digest version of that, if you don't mind. Sure. So as you were, I'm assuming you're aware because you're well versed in this stuff. At the last board of supervisors, oh, not the last one. The board of supervisors meeting, Mr. Troilo came and asked for several variances. The board.
Mr. Troilo was there?
Yes.
Was it Mr. Troilo
no,
himself?
CT, the
Okay.
son. Yeah.
Okay.
But he has been the one representing the developer along with their attorney, Ed Murphy. They were at our meeting, and they presented what their ideas and their plan, and they presented the variances that they were requesting. We voted as the board of I'm on the board of supervisors, so the board of supervisors voted to actively oppose the higher density development at the site. We voted to oppose the off-site parking at Veterans Square. I knew you'd like that one.
Thank you.
And we voted to oppose not allowing, basically they didn't want to put the sidewalk on Yardley Langhorne Road where they're supposed to by the ordinance, and we opposed allowing them
We
not to
don't
do
oppose
that.
it.
Right. And then the other variances they requested, we vote, and there's a nuance here, so I want to make sure this is clear. We voted to participate with all of the other variances they requested in terms of size of the buildings, setbacks, and porches or no porches. That doesn't mean we're accepting it or we're promoting it. It just means we're sending our attorney to participate, to gain more information, come back to the board. Maybe we oppose that, maybe we don't in the future, but we're going to oppose the primary the primary variance request that would allow this large development, offsite parking, walking across your property, right? All that stuff we're opposing actively with sending our attorney to say, yeah, we don't want this. And then the other stuff still allows them some flexibility in their design approaches and what they want to build, but we want to still work with them to do something to keep these buildings from falling down and making the point a nice location. But we don't want them to overbuild it as I keep saying. I'll say it one more time, just because the 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack. That's how I kind of describe their position right now. So we're trying to make it. We're trying to push for a development that meets obviously meets the criteria of Edgewood Village requirements, but 2, the scale. We want the scale to be in line with what else is there, so it's not overbearing. They're not ruining your quality of life by putting a parking lot right up next to your lot line, clearing out all the trees that have historically been there, and everything else that goes, walking across your property so that people can park and drive around right next to you. All those things, we're trying to manage that down. So that's where it's going. They did ask for. We also, related to that, we also asked that the HARB, who we're meeting with tonight, and the Historic Commission, who met on Monday morning, provide us by the Board of Supervisors with their opinions on this plan so that it further informs us. And we also asked the developer to ask for a continuance with the zoning hearing board so that we have time to get all that information prior to the zoning hearing board formally hearing those items. And of course, you still have the opportunity as neighbors, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong here, to provide testimony at the zoning hearing board, to be formal participants, I believe, right, Jim? Because they're neighbors.
That is correct.
Okay.
You could take what's called party status, in which you say that I would like to be a party to this matter, and that allows you the opportunity to present your own witnesses if you should choose. You can cross-examine witnesses that may be presented by the developer. I could send you information on that, and that stuff is typically explained at the beginning of a zoning hearing board meeting, what party status is. And we can go through that if you'd like.
Yeah. And Jim, they should be getting notice, right? As owners, as neighbors, they should be getting formal public notice.
I believe they should have received the notice already.
Already? Okay.
Yeah. And if I may answer one question from Dr. Semino, actually 2 questions. The parking lot is required to only be 5 feet from the property line. That 5 feet must be landscaped so that it will, look a little bit nice. If you did a shared parking arrangement, it could go over the property line, but that would have to be agreeable to both parties, obviously, to do that. And then the other question about open space, there is a requirement under historic commercial, if you develop under that part of the ordinance, to have 200 square feet per unit. That was changed in 2004. So that memo from 1983, they cut the number from 500 square feet down to 200. But what's applicable in this case, they're developing under the traditional neighborhood development ordinance, is a requirement for 8% open space and a minimum of 2,500 square feet. And I believe they have 3,000 proposed on their plan. So I believe they're compliant in that regard for the parking and for the amount of open space. And of course, all of this is subject to verification. Typically, when they go further along in the plan, our engineer would review all that stuff in great detail, measuring out every last thing on the plan to make sure that their plan is accurate.
this is residential. So residential, I know it's historic commercial, but he's putting in residential apartments. And I'm thinking residential would require more square feet. The reason why I think that, of course, it's from years ago, but when we bought our property, we were told, I think it was Mrs. Hines, that we needed a certain amount of square footage in the back of the manse if we're to retire there. And she knew, that was our plan.
Yeah.
So that's the information we were given 30 years ago.
Yeah, and things have changed over the years. I'm not sure what year you bought your property. What year did you buy the property?
2002, Jim.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they changed that ordinance requirement in 2004. So you could do more with your property now than you could back when you bought it.
Yeah, and we can't hear you, Mrs. Semino. You're
The same for residential and commercial then.
so one thing
Well, there's a lot of nuances to it.
Yeah. One thing I would recommend, because you're clearly able to read the code, if you haven't seen it yet, on our www.lmt.org, the township website, there's
Yes.
a government up at the top of the website. There's a drop-down menu under government.
Okay.
And under there, when you see the drop-down menu, there's a link for the code book. And that'll bring you to our online code. And then when you get into that, you go down, you can scroll down to chapter 200 zoning.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, you can look up all of the TND regulations under Article 9A, Traditional Neighborhood Development Overlay District. And you can read that till your heart's content and get all the nitty-gritty, latest and greatest details.
I was up until 2 a.m. last night.
I'm sure. So it's a little easier than some of the
I think,
old stuff.
They did read that, and I think I can pull out the appropriate information for them, make it a little bit easier, because it is a several hundred-page document. So
yeah.
All right, well, I thank you for the latest information, Mr. Majewski, about the code. So let me just reiterate our concerns that I shared with the Sport Commission yesterday, and I'll try to be brief. And with regard to the variances, 7 variances that were requested, we were concerned about the density of 22.4 per acre, 17 for this 3/4 acre. But if the Board of Supervisors has already decided that's not going to happen, then our concern is somewhat alleviated. Without a variance, they would be entitled to 9 units, 3/4 of an acre.
So, Dr. Semino, I just want to make sure you're clear on something. The Board of Supervisors can say we oppose something, but the Zoning Hearing Board is a completely separate entity where they can vote any way they want to independently of the Board of Supervisors. So I would highly recommend that you make sure that your concerns are known to the Zoning Hearing Board in addition to what you're doing right now, just because the Board of Supervisors might agree with you. The Zoning Hearing Board may never hear that from you if you don't attend. So I just want to make sure you're clear on the difference between the two.
Thank you, I am. And I reached out his office contacted us.
We can't hear
Zoning
you.
Hearing Board meeting last week. I reached out to
That-
him in his office to make myself an interested party.
Are you getting any of that? Okay.
No,
Dr.
Dr.
Semino,
Semino, we can't hear you again. I'm sorry.
What
If-
I
if
said
you-
was, can you hear me now?
Yes.
if back further, you actually have better.
Let me try
Reception.
this.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
That's great.
So after Mr. Majewski's office reached out to us, I reached out to Jamie at the township and sent an official email that I want to be an interested party for all matters concerning this plan. And I'm
Fantastic.
curious, because I do know the zoning hearing was postponed to February. If the Board of Supervisors opposes a variance, but the zoning board allows it, how is that then decided?
The zoning hearing board has complete jurisdictions in all matters related to appeals from the zoning ordinance. So it doesn't matter how much the board loves a project, hates a project, or has no concerns about a project and leads to the zoning hearing board. The zoning hearing board is an independent body. They're basically 5 resident volunteers who are appointed by the zoning hearing board. Once they're appointed by the zoning hearing board, they're their own independent body. They actually contract with their own solicitor who advises them on the matters of legal issues related to the zoning code and case law. But they decided based on the criteria that are within the municipality's planning code and our ordinance, where the applicant has to come up with their justification of what their hardship is, how they meet the criteria. And there's 4 set criteria, which I could send you the information on that too, so you can see what criteria they're judging it against. But the zoning hearing board, if they vote to ignore our board of supervisors, which they have in the past, and decide that they'll approve all the variances, the recourse is that you or any other party to the proceedings can appeal that to the county court. And we'll see where they go from there. But I know that in speaking with Mr. Trillo today, he had said that he had spoken to Mr. Hines and he's looking to possibly make some changes to the plans. And also he's looking to talk to you so that they can get your input. And so the plan may change, which may change your thoughts on it, the Board of Supervisors' thoughts. But as of right now, as a party to the matter, you have the right to present your case. You could cross-examine their witnesses and put that on the record. And the important thing is if the decision goes against you or if it goes against the applicant, they want to make sure they have a clear record of the evidence so that any party who appeals can say, I've objected to it for this reason, and I believe the zoning hearing board erred in their judgment, and this is why it should be overturned. So that's kind of how the process generally works.
Oh, thank you for that explanation. So now let me continue to say that for the variances that were applied for, my wife and I feel that Part A, the density of 22.4 was in excess of the 9 which would be allowed, and we don't see any reason to make this a congested property. The relief from sidewalks, we don't agree with the relief from sidewalks, as Mr. Grenier has also stated. And in our feeling, there's been a public turnaround where during the Planning Commission meeting in April, Mr. Murphy in the minutes presented the idea that the facade would look similar to the Di Lorenzo property with regard to stylings and sidewalks. And yet now in this plan, the sidewalks have disappeared. A similar thing happened with the relief from porches, where in the HARB meeting of May, Mr. Troilo or his representative said to the HARB that when questioned, would the stylings look like Di Lorenzo? The answer would be somewhat, but the stylings would more trend towards what's already on the property, including the porches that are already there. And yet now in this plan, the majority of the porches have disappeared. So with the other parts of these variances, the largest building, 163% of what's existing, we feel that's unnecessary congestion. The use of public parking opposite our property, we were shocked when in the the Planning Commission meeting of May, the vice chair said in the minutes that people could park at Veterans Square and merely walk across the chapel property to get to their buildings. We thought that was an affront to our rights. And the relief from commercial use concerns me. It concerns me that it goes against the philosophy of developing the historic district. And it also seemed, at least by my reading, that it provides them with less of a responsibility for maintaining green space. But again, I've got to bring myself up to code on what's allowed in the historic commercial district when it's residential only versus shared commercial residential use. when
Thank you.
when the building setback is requested of 5 feet, I thought that is not acceptable because it's driven by the congestion of the property. And if in fact one of those 3 buildings was eliminated from the property, the congestion would be relieved and the setback of 5 feet would no longer be required. It could be closer to code, perhaps 10 or 15 feet instead of the requested 5. So essentially, for the 7 variances requested in this application from November, if it was up to my wife and I, we would oppose all of them. I think that's all the comments we need to make.
Okay, Dr. Shimino, just, I'm sure Mr. Majewski might have further input on this, but I would say that what I found with most zoning hearing boards is that it is most important to get all the facts on the record, because any appeal will rely on the fact that they got the total package and made an error in judgment. Only appeal for their interpretation would be accepted as reason for overturning their decision. So it would be important for you to make sure that if you're doing the questioning, you make sure that you get all the information that you want to get out, and then maybe even have professionals who come in who can testify on your behalf with other facts that have a bearing on making the decision correctly. So it takes a lot of preparation, but I guess you have till February.
Okay, very
And
good.
if I
Thank
may
you.
add, I think Dr. Cimino has done a very thorough job at looking at this so far in just the limited amount of time he's had the chance to do it. And so you've actually made a good case for yourself that something similar to that with a little more backup on it at the zoning hearing board would help you out quite a bit.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for all your presentations. Luba, would you want to chime in here with anything?
I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Granier, for the board decision in terms of the votes against the variances. You know, that's very promising. And all your explanation and description of the reasons for it, I actually concur with everything. So I will be just repeating exactly, all your points, the same as what, Steve, what you have presented. The important things, the sidewalks, I think they're an absolute necessity to preserve the village streetscape. The porches, maybe if not in all of the units, having alternating porches once the density is lower. We had mentioned about the density from the very beginning. I'm really looking forward. The plan is, I think it's exciting that we are getting somewhere that has some promise. The residences that are presented along Yardley Langhorne Road would create a nice perspective, a village perspective. They don't have necessarily to be so regimented, exactly separated, but the same distances, having some setbacks. Also, I don't even mind having some, like what they have, a bit of tilting. It reminds me of in the past, things were just designed inside. They were not really placed with, measuring exactly the perpendiculars. It would look a more organic look, something that maybe was there before, and would create an interesting sort of light and shadow effect as you look at the complex. So basically, it's just about, I'm just repeating what what the board, Mr. Grenier said, what Steve, what you said. But I think, there are promises. And if if Mr. Troilo can, be more flexible and follow some of the suggestions, we could be having a finally nice development, because they are going to restore the two historical homes, which is great. I'm really looking forward to that. That's about it. I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Luba. Mike, do you have any
No,
words? Okay.
not
Uh,
not at this time. No, thank you.
I did neglect to mention one other thing, that Mr. Troilo came to me to kind of run up the flagpole and see what kind of response he got, is that he was suggesting if we took down the Quill House and restored it exactly, rebuilt it, would that be acceptable? And I said, well, I can't speak for the board entirely. It would be really hard for me personally to accept that kind of detail and care could be given to that. So I think once it disappeared, it would be very hard to get it back again, similar to those two buildings that they were supposed to restore, reconstruct on the development, Flowers Field development. So that was one of the things. And I will reiterate the discussions, and it seemed to me to be the acquiescence of Mr. Troilo when he was in the prior meeting, I guess it was in May, that we said the density was way too great, with a line of 5 duplex houses along, cheek by jowl, party wall houses along Yardley Langhorne Road. And at that point, he seemed to be saying, okay, I understand your position and we'll work within that. And I was hoping that our previous discussions with him, I think over the email network, is that he was coming in with fewer houses than he presented to us and presented to the Board of Supervisors. So density, it seems to me, is the biggest failing in what we have here. I think everybody here tonight has agreed with that. And I think if we send any message to Mr. Troilo, if he manages to get a copy of this video, and I think if Mr. Majewski says that he can make it available with a link or something like that, as well as to the HARB members who were not here. There's an awful lot of information that came in, and we certainly appreciate the position of Dr. Semino, and hope that we can work together with him and with the rest of the village residents, including across the street, and have some input in the, I guess the best place would be in the appeals, zoning appeals board meeting, where most of this information should be reiterated and strongly supported by whatever evidence we can present, including experts. So if there's no further discussion, we're well into the 7 o'clock hour, and if there's some, Dan, please.
Really quick question for Mr. Majewski, because the developers applied for certain variances based on a certain site plan that they've provided. We know that the zoning hearing board isn't going to be till February at this point, I believe. Well, at least that's my understanding. If I'm wrong, please correct me. Given that the developer has spoken to you, Stephen, spoken to others, seems like he might be willing and able to make some changes ahead of time. If we come in with, if there's a new site plan, Jim, that maybe doesn't need these variances and looks different, can you very quickly tell us how the process may change or get tweaked if there's a new site plan to look at for both this board, the Board of Supervisors, and folks like Dr. Semino?
If they modify their plan to eliminate some of their variances or reduce the scope of relief that they've requested, they can amend their application as they're going through. The Board of Supervisors will be given that information, as well as interested parties, which Dr. Semino has expressed his interest in that. So any change in the application, he will automatically be notified of that. And then we do post all of our plans that we get for the zoning hearing board online for the general public, in addition to all the people who are notified. So generally, if they're doing that, the application will be modified. Depending on what they're doing, it could require a re-advertisement of the variances in the newspaper, which is one of the requirements. That remains to be seen whether that's needed or not. Typically, if you're downscaling your relief requested, you typically don't need to advertise it unless you're changing the whole general character of what you're doing.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Yes, thank you very much. So I would call upon Luba to make a motion to adjourn.
Yes, I have one.
Anything else?
Yes, I have one more point, and really
Sure.
not related to the building placement, but I would like to see if somebody would consider the safety, the driving safety about that point, about the intersection. I don't know who's would depend that on, putting some lights there, because that's a really very dangerous intersection at the point. It's something to be looked at. So not really related to the placement of the structures, but it will definitely be more necessary to address that.
I think everyone recognizes that, Luba, and we're trying to, as things develop, no pun intended, that's something that may need to be addressed more formally in the right situation. But we're all between that and the sidewalks and making sure that folks can safely cross the street to get between residences and businesses. That's something that's definitely on our radar.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
agree 100%.
Thank you.
All right, Luba, motion to adjourn.
Yeah, motion to adjourn at this time.
Okay. Before we do, I'd certainly like to make sure we wish everybody a great time with their families over the holiday season, and we want to extend our thanks to the township, the people on the HARB, for their cooperation and their consideration. There was one other item. Sorry, I'm glad I took the moment to think about it. They're asking for a schedule for January and February for meeting, and I'm wondering whether we can get back to meeting in person.
Doesn't seem that it's really very feasible now with the new variant developing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I think you guys all have to figure out. I know there are only a few boards that want to meet in person, so that's a difficult thing to come about.
Right.
Yeah.
And if I might offer one more plug here,
Yes.
something we had discussed, we do have a vacancy on the Historical Architectural Review Board. That vacancy must be filled by a licensed real estate broker. That person need not be a resident of Lower Makefield. So if there's any licensed real estate brokers out there, not even a township resident necessarily, please send a letter of interest into the township admin@lmt.org. And that's all I have.
Yeah. And then, Stephen, if I may, you just reminded me that this is our last meeting of the year. So one, I want to say thank you to all the members of the HARB and for everyone attending these meetings and all the good work that you do. As you're probably aware, I am the supervisor liaison, and supervisor liaisons generally change every year. So it's not, it won't be up to me to whoever the next chair of the board of supervisors is, usually makes those appointments to whoever the individual supervisors will be. They will tell the supervisors which boards and committees they will liaise with. So if I don't have the opportunity to continue this with you all next year, I just want to say thank you for having me, and thank you for all the effort you put in. It's been I really enjoy working with this group, especially because you put in a lot of hard work and are very knowledgeable. So it's appreciated.
Well, thank you. You have done a great job. I really appreciate it. Very, very professional and also very knowledgeable and very
and shows up to
detail-oriented.
most of the meetings. So, yeah, we certainly appreciate that, Dan. And if you could hold on for just a minute, if everybody leaves, I did want to touch base on that other issue with you. So, I guess we can call the question of adjournment, and hopefully everybody will have a good night. All in favor?
Aye.
I can't hear you, Jim.
Yes.
Yes?
You technically didn't have a meeting, so you didn't need to have a motion. to
Okay.
adjourn.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
This is just a workshop. We just have to say goodbye.
Okay. Good night, all.
Good
thanks,
night. Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Good night.